For decades, Method Man has been one of the most respected names in hip-hop. From his Wu-Tang Clan days to acting on TV and becoming a cultural icon, he's always been seen as the cool, laid-back legend. He never let beefs define his career. But now, at 54, Method Man has finally opened up and revealed the 6 artists he couldn't stand. And trust me, the names on this list aren't random. They tell the story of rivalries, betrayal, and the hidden grudges behind the scenes of rap's golden era. At number 6, we've got Joe Budden. Now, not every beef in hip-hop starts with a diss track or a threat. Sometimes it only takes a single comment to light the fuse, and that's exactly what happened between Method Man and Joe Budden. The year was 2009. Vibe magazine had just dropped its highly talked about list of the best rappers of all time. Sitting proudly on that list was none other than Method Man, a man whose place in hip-hop seemed untouchable to most. After all, this was a Wu-Tang legend, a voice and presence that had defined an era. But while fans nodded in agreement, one rapper wasn't having it: Joe Budden. Budden, already known for being outspoken and brutally honest, took to the internet and made it crystal clear that he wasn't impressed. In a video that spread quickly across hip-hop circles, he boldly dismissed the idea of Method Man being anywhere near the top. "I don't think he's a top-tier lyricist," Budden said with no hesitation. "I will not put him in my top, anywhere." For most artists, this might have just been another opinion floating online. But in hip-hop, where respect is currency and legacy is sacred, Budden's words hit like a direct shot at Method Man's crown. And Method Man heard it loud and clear. He wasn't just irritated, he felt personally disrespected. This wasn't just about rankings. This was about someone questioning the very foundation of everything he had built. The tension spilled offline when both men crossed paths at the Rock the Bells festival. What happened next made it clear that Budden's words had gone way beyond harmless critique. As Joe Budden was moving around backstage, he was suddenly confronted by a member of Raekwon's crew. Without warning, Budden was punched in the face.
So now my focus is there. I don't even hear what Joe's saying. I go to snatch the out his head.
It wasn't just a scuffle. It was a reminder that when you call out one member of Wu-Tang, you're taking on the whole clan. Behind the scenes, Method Man was still fuming. In fact, years later, he admitted on Math Hoffa's podcast just how close he came to handling Budden himself. But then came the twist. Instead of things turning into an all-out war, Method Man and Joe Budden actually spoke. But while Budden was talking, Method Man was furious.
But the whole time you was talking, I was gonna snuff you. But
in that conversation, Method Man began to see things differently.
The reason why I didn't in that moment was because you said some...
Budden, he realized, wasn't trying to take food off his table or tarnish his career. He was just speaking from the perspective of a lyricist obsessed with wordplay and technical skills. That understanding changed everything. The anger cooled and the feud never grew into something uglier. Another artist that landed on Method Man's bad side was Macklemore. Now, this wasn't a typical rap beef. There were no back-and-forth diss tracks, no Twitter wars, and no Wu-Tang fists flying backstage. The problem ran much deeper than that. For Method Man, Macklemore wasn't the enemy as a person. He was the face of a much bigger issue in the music industry. The story really came to a head on one of the biggest nights in music, the 56th Annual Grammy Awards in 2014. Hip-hop fans had been waiting for this moment. Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, MAA, D-City, was up for Best Rap Album. This wasn't just an album, it was a masterpiece, a cinematic journey through the streets of Compton, filled with storytelling so sharp and authentic that critics were already calling it a classic. To many in the culture, the Grammy was a done deal. Kendrick had to win. But when the envelope was opened, the name that came out stunned the entire hip-hop world. Macklemore, Ryan Lewis for The Heist. Sure, The Heist was a massive commercial success. Songs like Thrift Shop and Can't Hold Us were everywhere, blasting through radio stations and dominating the charts. But to hip-hop purists like Method Man, the album wasn't built on the same foundation as Kendrick's work. It was fun, catchy, and undeniably popular, but it didn't carry the depth, pain, or cultural weight that Kendrick's album did. To many, including Method Man, this wasn't just a wrong decision. It was proof of something much bigger. The industry would always lean toward the safer, more palatable choice, even if it meant overlooking the raw authenticity that defined hip-hop. When Method Man spoke on the situation later in an interview, he didn't attack Macklemore directly. He was too smart for that. But he made his feelings crystal clear. For Method Man, this was bigger than one award. It was about respect. It was about the Grammys once again showing they didn't understand the culture, rewarding sales and radio hits instead of artistry and authenticity. And to make matters more complicated, Macklemore himself seemed to know the truth. After the win, he sent Kendrick Lamar a text that read, "You got robbed. I wanted you to win. You should have." Then he posted the text on Instagram for the world to see. Some praised him for admitting it. Others, like Drake, slammed him for turning what should have been a private apology into a public spectacle. But for Method Man, none of that mattered. The damage had already been done. The industry had once again proven that when it came to hip-hop, they didn't always honor the artists pushing the culture forward. And in that moment, Macklemore became the symbol of everything Meth had been calling out for years. An industry darling celebrated for being safe and marketable, while the true voice of the streets was overlooked. At number 4, we have Destiny's Child. Now, Method Man's issue with Beyoncé, Kelly, and Michelle wasn't born from some headline-grabbing feud or years of public back and forth. It came from a single moment, one encounter that stung so badly it lived rent-free in his head for almost 20 years. The year was 2001, and the setting was the MOBO Awards in London, one of the biggest nights for black music around the globe. Destiny's Child were at the peak of their powers, dominating charts worldwide with hit after hit. They weren't just popular, they were untouchable. 3 women who were arguably the most famous girl group on the planet. Method Man, already a legend himself through Wu-Tang Clan and his solo success, was there too. And as a fan of their music, he did what any starstruck artist might do. He walked over to say hello. What happened next would stay with him for decades. According to Method Man, he walked up to their table, smiled, and stretched out his hand to greet them. In his mind, this was simple respect. But instead of meeting him halfway, Destiny's Child didn't even look at him. They kept talking among themselves, carrying on like he wasn't even standing there. Think about that. A man who helped define an era in hip-hop, left standing there embarrassed in public, feeling brushed off by 3 of the biggest stars in music. That sting cut deep, and it did more than bruise his ego. It changed how he acted. For years afterwards, every time he saw Destiny's Child at an event, he made sure to give them the same cold energy he thought they had given him. By his own admission, he was petty about it. Instead of brushing it off, he carried the bitterness with him, letting that one encounter dictate his attitude toward the group. But here's where the story takes a turn. Nearly 2 decades later, Method Man finally sat with those feelings and realized something important. The issue wasn't really about Destiny's Child. It was about him, about his insecurities in that moment, about how easily his ego was bruised. And when he reflected on it, he knew he had been wrong. So during that very interview, he did something many artists would never do. He apologized. Looking straight into the camera, Meth said, "I apologize to Beyoncé. I apologize to Kelly Rowland and Michelle. Y'all did not deserve that at all."
I apologize to Beyoncé, I apologize to Kelly Rowland and Michelle. Y'all did not.
The women of Destiny's Child never spoke publicly about the incident, so their perspective has never been heard. Maybe they didn't notice him that night. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. But for Method Man, that night had been a defining one. It forced him, years later, to confront his own pride and admit he had let a grudge poison how he treated people. Next on the list is Divine, also known as Mitchell Diggs. Now, not every feud Method Man has had came from outside rivals. Sometimes the most painful battles happen at home, within the very circle you thought you could trust the most. And for Method Man, his long-running conflict with Divine, the CEO of Wu-Tang Productions and the older brother of Wu-Tang's leader RZA, was exactly that. From the start, it all seemed like the perfect plan. Wu-Tang Clan had taken the rap game by storm, and to protect their brand from the sharks in the industry, they decided to keep business in the family. RZA's brother Divine stepped in to handle the money, contracts, and the group's financial empire. To Method Man and the rest of the clan, this felt safe. After all, who could you trust more than family? But as the years rolled by and Wu-Tang grew into one of the most recognizable names in music, the dream began to crack. What was meant to keep the family strong started to feel like a cage. Method Man and other members slowly realized they weren't in control of their own empire anymore. Instead of partners, they felt like employees. Instead of transparency, there was secrecy. The frustration kept building. Method Man, never one to bite his tongue, spoke openly in interviews and especially in the Showtime documentary Wu-Tang Clan. Of Mics and Men, he revealed how he and others felt left in the dark when it came to finances, where the money from tours, merchandise, and deals was really going. Questions were asked, but answers never came. For Meth, it wasn't just about dollars. It was about respect, about having a say in the legacy he helped create. One of the clearest examples of this divide came with the infamous Once Upon a Time in Shaolin album. This wasn't just another project. It was designed as a one-of-a-kind piece of art, pressed into a single copy and then sold off to the highest bidder. That bidder turned out to be Martin Shkreli, the controversial pharma bro who had already made headlines for price-gouging life-saving. The sale made millions, but for Method Man, it was a betrayal of everything Wu-Tang stood for. To him, their music was for the people, not for one man to lock away like a trophy. This wasn't quite resentment either. Method Man made his anger known. In Of Mics and Men, he summed it up in one raw line. When you dealing with brothers, it's a touchy situation. It's not like you can just fire your brother. That one sentence cut to the core of the issue. He was stuck in a business relationship that felt toxic, but he couldn't just walk away without tearing apart the very family that built Wu-Tang. He wasn't alone. Other members, like U-God, voiced the same frustration. U-God even released a book exposing how mismanagement left him nearly broke. The cracks in Wu-Tang's foundation weren't just rumors. They were real, and they ran deep. For Method Man, his feud with Divine was never just about contracts or bank statements. It was about betrayal. About watching the brotherhood he thought would last forever get swallowed up by money and corporate decisions. Divine was supposed to be the guardian of their empire, the one to protect them from outsiders. Instead, Method Man felt he had become the very thing they were trying to avoid. At number 2, we have P. Diddy. Method Man's problem with Sean P. Diddy Combs was never about street drama or diss tracks. There were no fists thrown, no insults traded in interviews, and no messy public war. The conflict was quieter, but in many ways more damaging. It was a battle inside the studio, and at the heart of it was something Method Man has always held sacred: artistic integrity. To understand this feud, you have to rewind to the early 2000s. By then, Method Man was already a superstar. He had his solo hits, he was still a core member of Wu-Tang, and he had even branched into Hollywood with acting roles. But music labels are never satisfied, and Def Jam wanted more. They didn't just want a solid record. They wanted a blockbuster, a radio-friendly smash that would dominate the charts. Their solution was simple. If you wanted a hit in the early 2000s, you called one man, P. Diddy. With his Bad Boy Empire and production team, the Hitmen, Diddy had perfected the formula for radio success. His sound was polished, flashy, and built for mainstream appeal. It was the exact opposite of what made Method Man great. Method Man was known for his rugged, unpolished energy. His music was dark, raw, and unapologetically street. Pairing him with Diddy's glossy, pop-leaning production was like putting oil and water together. And worst of all, this decision wasn't really his. It was the label's idea. Def Jam brought in Diddy to shape Method Man's third solo album, Tickle Zero, the prequel, whether Meth liked it or not. From that moment, the problems began. Instead of being able to create the music he wanted, Method Man was pushed into sessions with Diddy's producers. He described the experience as frustrating and soul-crushing. Rather than building his vision, he felt like a guest on his own project. The beats were polished, the hooks were catchy, and the entire vibe was tailored for radio, not for Wu-Tang fans. Method Man has never hidden how he feels about that album. In fact, he's disowned it multiple times. And while the album did sell, it went gold and gave the label what they wanted. The cost was high. Critics tore it apart, and fans rejected it. The core audience that had followed Method Man since Tickle and Wu-Tang Forever felt betrayed. They didn't want a glossy, commercialized Method Man. They wanted the gritty storyteller, the guy who gave them raw verses over grimy beats. The backlash stung, but it also proved Method Man right. For him, Tickle Zero wasn't just a disappointing record, it was a turning point. It showed him what happens when you let the corporate side of the music industry dictate your art. It taught him that chasing radio hits could ruin your reputation with the people who matter most, the fans. And at the center of that lesson stood P. Diddy, not as a personal enemy, but as the face of everything Method Man hated about the industry. Over the years, Method Man has been clear. He respects Diddy as a businessman. He doesn't hate him as a man. But when it came to music, their worlds simply didn't belong together. For Method Man, the Diddy experiment was proof that his artistry couldn't be forced into a shiny suit. And that lesson has stuck with him ever since. At the very top of our list is U-God. Out of all the conflicts in Method Man's career, the one with U-God cuts the deepest. This wasn't about the music industry, contracts, or outsiders meddling in their business. This was family. Wu-Tang Clan has always been more than just a rap group. They were brothers who built an empire together, and with family comes love, loyalty, but also bitterness and fights that hit harder than any diss track ever could. Fans got their first raw look at this tension in the 2005 documentary, Rock the Bells. Backstage, with emotions already running high, U-God and Method Man went at each other in a shouting match that was as explosive as it was uncomfortable to watch. U-God felt disrespected, like his role in the group was constantly being downplayed. Method Man, clearly exhausted and fed up, snapped back with the fury of someone who had carried too much for too long. It wasn't just two rappers arguing. It was two brothers unloading years of frustration in front of the world. To understand why this happened, you have to know U-God's story. He didn't get the same start as the rest of the clan. While the others were recording Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers in 1993, U-God was behind bars. Because of that, he barely appeared on the album that made Wu-Tang legends. From the beginning, he was fighting from behind. In his 2018 memoir Raw, My Journey into the Wu-Tang, U-God talked about how he always felt like he had to claw for his spot, for his verses, for his money. He believed the group's management overlooked him, and he often pointed to stars like Method Man as benefiting the most while his own contributions were ignored. From Method Man's side, it looked completely different. By the mid-2000s, Meth was one of the clan's biggest stars, carrying not just his own career but the Wu-Tang name everywhere he went. The pressure was insane. He was the one doing movies, guest appearances, tours, and interviews. And while he was grinding to keep the brand alive, the constant complaints from within the group started to wear him down. In Showtime's Wu-Tang Clan of Mics and Men, you can see how drained he was by the endless internal fights. When U-God pressed him and rocked the bells, Meth's explosion wasn't just about that one argument. It was years of stress, responsibility, and pent-up anger boiling over. That is what makes their feud so complicated. It was never simple hatred. It was perspective. U-God saw himself as underappreciated, always fighting for his piece of the pie. Method Man saw himself as overburdened, carrying the weight of the Wu-Tang name while being dragged into constant disputes. Both sides were real, both sides were painful, and that is why the argument was so powerful. And yet, through all of this, they never walked away. They still perform together. They still stand on the same stage, shoulder to shoulder. Because at the end of the day, Wu-Tang is forever. That bond runs too deep to break. The clash between Method Man and U-God shows just how messy brotherhood can get. Love and hate often live in the same house. And in Wu-Tang's case, that house has always been on full display for the world to see. And there you have it. The 6 artists Method Man admitted he just couldn't stand. For a man who's built his legacy on respect, talent, and staying true to himself, these grudges show a very different side of him. But what do you think? Do you agree with the names he mentioned? Were some of these beefs justified, or do you think Method Man held on to grudges for too long? And here's the big one. If Method Man had to name 6 artists he loved the most, who do you think would make that list?